Hi everybody, today we're going to have a little bit of a look at rendering. So we want to render out our entire sequence. So first of all, open up your project, choose the camera that you want the camera view. Mine is just using the standard perspective, but I can add a camera if I need be, as per previous lessons. So I've got this animation here of this robot walking through my scene. Okay, it's having a bit of a stomp through this space station or something. And this animation goes for 100 frames, so approximately 4 seconds. So make sure that your animation settings are as they're supposed to be. This is 24 frames per second. So we just want to make sure that everything, we've got all our settings right before we render it out. Okay. What I can also do is I can go into here, because the framing of this is going to be different to the framing of your actual render. So these buttons here, we can show the framing of what's actually going to be seen by the camera. And I can actually use this mask here, and that's actually going to be what my camera sees. So I can see that my character's nice and in frame here, and he's moving toward the left. And we finish up. As we finish up, he's just sort of on the opposite end, so he sort of moves from right to left in the scene. So I'm pretty happy with that framing. He's not chopped off or anything like that, so it's a good scene of my character walking through an environment. Okay, good. The first thing we want to do is just make sure that everything's working fine. So we can do this with just our play controls. But if your computer might be running a little bit slowly, so a method you can do here is go to your animation menu and choose under playback. Whoops, this is really annoying. Playback, play blast, and if I press play blast, it's going to create a movie file of just my render window. So not the final animation, but this is just going to give me make it see, I'll be able to see whether my animation looks how I want it to look. This will just open up in your default player, and see it's got all these things on the screen that we, such as my HUD and lights and things like that. So I'm pretty happy with the motion there. I think the walk's fairly realistic, and I think the timing's pretty good. So I'm going to stick with that. And I think that, but if I thought that this was too long or too short, that's a really good way to test it out before I go through the long process of rendering it out and realizing, oh, I've made an error. Okay, so once we've got that, we want to make sure that our settings are correct. So up the top here, we have our render menus. So I'm just going to do a quick single render to make sure that the lighting is correct. And this is on a low resolution, so this is going to be fairly quick. I just want to make sure that my lighting is correct. And if this were my actual real animation, I can see I've got this this background's a little bit blurry, so I'd probably find a more high-res image for that. But otherwise, I'm just looking at all of these other aspects, and I think they're all looking pretty good for what I'm after. Okay, so I'm going to click on this one. It's the old clapperboard with a little gear icon. Those little gear icon represents settings. So I'm going to render settings. And I'll make sure that I've got everything correct. So make sure you've got the Arnold renderer, of course. And in the common, I want to give my file a name. So I'm going to call this robot render. Okay. And I want to make sure that I have the right settings here. So Arnold renderer only will not render a movie. It'll only render a sequence of JPEG images or a sequence of TIFF images or something like that. And you have to put them together using an external program. This is because your render might crash, or you can use a render farm. You can render out 10 frames with one computer, 10 frames with another computer, and so on. So this just gives you a bit of flexibility to put your project together. So what I need to do is choose Frame Animation Extension, and choose one that's multi-frame. So I'm going to choose name hash extension, so that will be the name of the file, robot render, hash being the frame number, robot render 1, robot render 2, and the extension is my format, which is going to be just JPEG will be fine. Yeah, so just make sure you've got all of those settings correct. Next, I've got my frame range, start frame 1, finish frame 100. And the presets, the camera, make sure it's the camera that you've chosen. And lastly, we want to choose the image size. So I've got some presets here, and the project requirements say we want this at HD 720, so it's 1280p by 720. So 1280 pixels by 720 pixels high. Okay, good. And we're going to close that. Okay, so let's have a look. Press play. I'm pretty happy with that framing. Okay, now this is going to take quite a long time to render. I just want to point this out. As you see, one small frame took a short while, but each one of these frames is going to take maybe 5 to 10 minutes. So that's, let's say 10 minutes, 100 frames, that's 1,000 minutes. So that's a long time to render all of this out, and that will leave your computer useless for potentially the best part of a day. So that's why it's important to get all these things right in the first place. Make sure that your project is saved to an appropriate place. So we can go to set project, and this is where your animation is going to end up. So all the frames are going to end up wherever you set your project. So if your project is on the desktop, then all of your animation frames are going to go on the desktop. If you haven't set it, then your animation frames are going to be hidden away somewhere, and it might take you half an hour to find them if you don't know where they're set. So make sure that you set your project, because that'll make your life easy later on. Okie dokie. Last we do is change to rendering. From the render menu, we use render sequence. So just here, I'm just going to click on the options. It chooses the camera, all of it. And you can actually set I didn't realize you can actually set a file location here, so you can set your file for where you want to be, for example, in your desktop or something like that. So that's actually quite useful. And all we do is click on render sequence, and off it goes. So I'm not going to do that now, because this is going to take some time to render my entire sequence. So what I want you to do is render your sequence, and it will just go through just like rendering a single frame, except it'll do this 100 times or 200 times or whatever that might be. So just make sure that that you're happy with how your render is. And see how long this is taking for just one portion of a frame. So this is going to do this 100 times. So I'm obviously not going to sit there and do that. If your frame is if your animation is 240 frames or 10 seconds, that's going to take 240 times one frame, which is a long time. So potentially an entire day. Okay, I'm just going to escape out of that to prevent it from continuing, but I'm very happy with that look and feel of the animation. Okay, so that concludes this tutorial, rendering. Next, when we get back to class, we're going to composite these animations and we'll add in sounds. Okay, thank you very much.